Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast where I get to simplify the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. You know, one of the most powerful forces or concepts that there is in marketing is this idea in around new and different or innovation. If you're doing what all the other chiropractors are doing or all the other businesses in your community are doing, then you're really setting yourself up for failure, or at best, just really lousy results. Now, my guest on the show today is Brad Glowaki. He's a returning guest, and he's the master of new and different. He's the master of innovation. I love seeing what Brad is doing because he's constantly reinventing himself. In today's episode, we talk about how Brad is using concussion to differentiate his practice. He's using it to build relationships, in particular with sporting groups in his community. And he's using it to drive a really high number of high quality new patients into his practice. This episode is an absolute masterclass on the power and the impact of innovation and new and different. And I think you're going to love it. Let's go and chat with Brad. Brad Glowaki, welcome to the Marketing Your Practice podcast. How are you, buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Dude, you're looking sharp as can be there. So you look healthy and well. How's life?
Been really good. Yeah, just out on the road a little bit and speaking to some chiropractic groups again and just having some fun doing what we do. So life is good.
Tell me, because you were recently just down here in Oz, and you shared a story on the socials about a very eventful trip or thing that happened to you on the plane on the way over. Can you share that with the listeners?
Yeah, it was kind of wild. I was sitting in the plane and taking that long trip down to Sydney from LA, and over the intercom, they ping the bell and say, "Is there a doctor on board?" And I like to look left and look right and see if anybody moves, and nobody was moving. I thought, oh man, I better put my shoes on. So I put my shoes on and walked over there, and I kind of take my time on purpose just because, if there's a heart attack or, something that needs medical intervention, I want to see who shows up first. And there was two nurses and two medical doctors on the scene and a blood pressure cuff, and kind of poked my head in there as the fifth person on the scene. I said, what's going on? They said, we don't know. Big guy, probably 6'4", 230, 240 pounds, like a big fella, had passed out. Sweat through his shirt, was on the ground, and we're not really sure what's going on. So one of the medical doctors was kind of the senior doctor, was doing what MDs do, and he was barking out orders to the two nurses who were obliging and running around for him. And it was like a little mini triage. And the MD had a blood pressure cuff, and they were checking him out and said, okay, his blood pressure, it seems like it bottomed out. It's closer to normal, and the BPM is okay, but not great. And okay, but we're good. And it was just like, wait, we're good? What do you mean? Like, the guy was still sitting on the floor of the plane, couldn't get on his feet. And then the MD just started talking about where they went to medical school and where the nurses were. And like the four of them were just having a chat. And this big dude that turns out he was an Aussie Rules football player, was on the ground, still kind of, eyes were messed up. So I said, hey, if you guys are done, can I jump in? I do a concussion protocol. I'm going to use my phone in slow-mo. I want to check the saccades, see what his eyes are doing. We'll see what his responsiveness is. And if it's cool, I'll jump in. They're like, yeah, he's not having a heart attack. So kind of like we're done. And I think that's a really good, metaphor almost for the listeners, is like, hey, there's a time and a place for each health field. And if you know what we do as chiropractors best, then you're comfortable in that role. So I basically boxed him out and stepped in and started talking to the guy and used my phone in a slow-mo mode to just check his eyes and just basic stuff. But after we checked him out and he was sitting there, he said, I'm not really sure what went on. And I played Aussie Rules football, but I retired a couple of years ago. And I said, okay, this has all the earmarks of a concussion. Have you had any traumas? And his answer was nothing more than usual. I said, well, what is that? I've been to some Aussie Rules football matches in Australia. That's the most barbaric sport, and I love it. But I just thought, that's crazy. What do you mean? And he said, well, I took an elbow to the face 2 days ago, and then he wiggled his front teeth, and he said, these things are still loose, but I've taken bigger hits in football. And I just thought, okay, well, this is starting to make some sense. And long story short, for your listeners' sake, I just said, I'm going to check your atlas and get you adjusted. And sure enough, after we got him adjusted, the dude felt amazing, hopped up on his feet. The flight attendants came over and thanked me, and then they made an announcement on the loudspeaker. And when we landed, the medical crew came over, and they wanted the doctor that helped him and the guy to get off first. And so I was sitting in my seat and pretty humble dude, and just said, "Oh, cool, whoever that is, like, cool." They said, "Well, you were the doctor that helped him, not the other two." I thought, right on, chiropractic should be first class. So we got off the plane first to a standing ovation, and a ton of accolades as we were going through. And it didn't get me through security any faster, but it did get me off the plane faster. And what was cool is I just said, "Have you ever been adjusted?" And his answer was no. I've never seen a
Yeah.
chiro. I've done a lot of physio, but he said that was amazing. And his upper cervical spine just erupted. And so I just said, well, after they check you out when we land, you really need to find a chiropractor. So that was my flight over to speak to a bunch of chiropractors. So I thought that was a good way to start the trip. And the rest of the trip in Australia kind of went that way.
It's a beautiful story. I was inspired to hear it too. It's, there are a lot of, I often kind of wonder what I would do in that scenario there as well. I've had different situations like that, but often, as chiropractors, we don't have the confidence to come forwards in those scenarios. But what you did so beautifully is, you're right. If he's having a heart attack or he's bleeding from his jugular, that's not our area. And once that triage is done, then let us have a look. And nice that the doctors seemed respectful of that as well. That's the relationship that we should be able to have with other health practitioners.
That's it. Yeah. And it's just, I said, "Hey, if you guys are down, I'm going to jump in." And they're like, "Well, there's nothing else we can do." And so I said, "Cool. This is what I do," and basically just stepped in there confidently. And when I got done, they had a ton of questions, and all very pleasant and very polite. But I think if your chiropractic listeners are on board with this, you'd also agree some of our very best patients are nurses. Right. Some of the best practice members are people that are in the system, but don't want to be in the system. Like they see how it's handled, but they don't want to be the recipient of the pills and drugs and meds. And with all due respect to the medical doctors, like if it was a heart attack, out of my range. If they were warming up the paddles, that's not my deal. But yeah, an Atlas adjustment, we can certainly do that. Because it was international airspace, I think I was okay legally. I'm not sure, but but the idea was, look, there's a time to jump in there, and it was super fun. And obviously, the applause and that stuff afterwards, I just thought, this is the time I wish I had a camera going, because this is what our profession deserves, is some first class treatment. There's a place for us at the table, and I think it's time that we start using our voice and really start messaging what it is that we want, and you can have more of it in your practice.
What do you think was the conversation that went on inside of your mind that had you have the confidence to get up and take those actions that might not have happened in a chiropractor who didn't step forwards?
I think honestly, first, it was like, if he's having a heart attack, I don't know what I'm going to do. It was almost that second of doubt of like, geez, I'm not fit to handle everything, which again, I think is probably a healthy perspective, because we're not. But then when I got there and I saw that they were basically done, but the guy was still sitting on the floor, he wasn't quote unquote better. I just looked at that. They're done. He's not better. This is where we enter the game. And, just talking to him and being on the level, and, even things like using my phone. It's like, what tools do I have? Well, I got my hands, I got a phone. We'll make this work. And if you put your phone on slow-mo, it's a really good way to check the eyes and look for saccades and see if there's that jumping, skipping going on. Just using the light on the phone, for pupil dilation, some of that stuff. So just real basic, but also understanding that they had done their job and there was nothing they could do more until we landed the plane in 3 hours. It was like, that's a long time to wait. So when I checked his Atlas, man, that thing was out in right field. What I thought of later, this would be a perfect guy for a chiropractic student who's learning palpation.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it was like, that's out and there's nothing over here. So that Atlas is definitely shifted. It was so obvious that this is what this guy needed, that we had to get him up off the ground first. Like I said, he was a big dude. I asked for an ice pack and they brought me 40 pounds of ice, like this huge monster bag.
Yeah.
So when we sat him down in his chair, that was the only place I could really adjust him, was in his seat. And so we just did a seated cervical, and my roommate in chiropractic school was a Gonstead doc. So set up on him and just let it rip. And, everybody around in the seats, their eyes opened up, and it was cool. It was just kind of a cool teaching moment for the power of chiropractic, which is different than medicine. And I think anytime we're having a marketing conversation, that's important to recognize. Different is marketable.
Yes.
I don't want to be like an MD. I don't want to blend into the system. That's the exact opposite of who I think we should be. We should be a specialist that does things differently. And if you're different, well, then you market to your differences. You don't market your sameness. That doesn't make any sense.
It is, because anything that's new and different is it's part of the reason why we see so many products on the shelf constantly reinvent themselves a little bit, new and improved formula there too. But it's interesting because this desire for us as chiropractors to fit in, to be liked there too, means that therefore we either, we want to show that we're the same. We don't want to do that. In fact, we do it. I find it's amusing when a chiropractor moves into a new area. They work out, like, what is everybody else charging? I'll charge the same. What is everybody else's hours open? I'll kind of open the same. When the best advice would be, do something different. Either charge a lot more or charge a lot less. Open different hours. Those things there too.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm interested to talk about concussion, which I think is so perfect in there too, because this is a conversation that, man, we were never talking about concussion 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago. Like, you had a concussion, no big deal, off you went there. But it's a big part of the conversation that's happening in the community nowadays. And there's also a really interesting role that chiropractors can play in concussion. Can you talk to me a little bit about your journey of understanding, linking those two things together, and what you're teaching chiropractors with regards to that now?
Sure. Yeah, and kind of like the story you just shared, I'll certainly give you the thumbnail sketch and not all the details. But long story short, we take care of some pro athletes. Anytime they have good results, I like to do interviews or recordings. And I say, don't mention my practice. You don't even need to mention my name, but just say something positive about the profession. Like, if these sports heroes have followers and fans on Instagram, and we know that now, it's quantifiable, that they have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of kids and fans, adults that listen to them. Say something positive about the profession. I don't want it to be a promo. It's not for my practice. It's not as though I'm trying to use this for new patients, but just something really good if we've gotten the results they're looking for. And whenever I do that, it really benefits the profession. So right now we've got an LA Lakers player that's making about an hour drive down to the office, and he drives an hour back. In Southern California, we have 8,000 chiropractors, but he chooses to drive to my office because of the value, because he thinks we're different. And quite honestly, that's debatable. But the value is there, and nonetheless, when they get the results, they want that. And so I had a patient who was a pro baseball player and looking to do the same, right? I wanted to get the results. I would love to get a story. We'd love to push it out there. I have a Stanley Cup winner that did something like that for us as well. Really good for the profession. But I wasn't getting the results. And finally sat him down as a pro baseball player and said, "What's up? What's going on?" He said, "Look, I haven't really shared this with many people, but I have some dark days. I'm not doing well mentally, and I've had, I think, one too many concussions, and that didn't make it into the history." So he was kind of hiding some of the injuries because he was coming up on a contract year. And if people know about injuries or limitations, you're less likely to be signed. Career is over, or the offers come in much lower when we're talking millions of dollars. So long story short, I said, "I don't know if I can help you. I have to be honest. I don't know. This is a really fuzzy area in healthcare, but I need to be a better doctor. And if I do that, we can kind of take this journey together. But I don't know the answers that you need. And we just start with some honesty and go from there." And that was really all he needed to hear, was that first ingredient, which is hope. Just somebody's willing to do this, and the honesty that came with it, and just kind of being humble, go, "Man, I don't know the answer, but let's start on this together." And as we went through this, I learned a ton. He certainly got better and came around because he was basically not sure if he was fit to be a father. And these are his own words, and he shared this on stages, on video. So I'm not breaking patient confidentiality, but he just said, I was had some really dark thoughts, and I didn't know, how could I be a father if this is what's going on up there? And the more you work with concussed patients, that becomes really the norm, is that they have these dark thoughts, and depression's a big part of it. Waking up and self-medicating. One of his quotes that he shared, he said, "If people don't have a chiropractor, then they will become their own pharmacist." And he was speaking in terms of pro athletes. He said, guys on a baseball team, if they don't have a chiropractor, they'll be their own pharmacist. They'll figure it out with medication. And that's where he was. And as we took the journey and went through the science, the research, and I looked at the medical side, and I interviewed medical doctors, they didn't know anything more than we did. And really, we started looking at this upper cervical problem that was going on, and all the correlations that were with it. So just some good stats for your listeners. There's almost a 4 times greater likelihood of an ACL tear after a concussion. And the idea is there's a proprioceptive loss. And the way I would describe that in lay terms is there's a body mismatch. So the brain thinks that, we're at one place in space and really you're at another. And if somebody's going to make a cut and plant their foot, the valgus angle of the knee is different than what the body thinks it is. So as far as what to turn on and turn off, the support structures aren't there. So there's usually a 3.7 times greater likelihood of an ACL tear with non-contact sports after a concussion, meaning it's not a hit. It's just somebody going to make a move and the mismatch is there. Whereas we know in chiropractic, if somebody's got unbalanced shoulders, the head doesn't stay sideways, the eyes come to meet the horizon. We call that the righting reflex. So things like the righting reflex are now working against the athlete because the calibration is off, the body position's off, the proprioception's off. And so there's almost a 2 times greater likelihood of shoulder surgery for throwing sports, Tommy John surgery specifically, for elbow and shoulder issues because of the same thing. The extremities are different in space from what the reality is because the brain hasn't been recalibrated. Leaky gut happens within 3 hours of a concussion. One of the first connections in embryology is the brain to gut. So we really start diving into this, and it's really an autonomic nervous system problem, which the brain is the master controller. So to me, it kind of made sense. And while medicine was looking at symptoms or parts, I kind of took that holistic approach and said, look, the brain's the master controller. It works through the spinal cord, upper cervical spine, C1, 2, and 3 are still considered brainstem. That's where we need to do our work. So just obviously applied what we learned and did it on a trial and error basis and was just open and honest and really had some profound results to where started teaching that to other docs and chiropractors and just saying, look, this is a different approach. Here's what we can do. And really just, exploring it and being humble enough to say, I don't know what we need to do, but let me find out. And then kind of turn it into a curriculum within my practice and then sharing it with docs as well.
Couple of questions. In terms of the amount of upskilling that you needed to do, we go back to that early stage. Is it a diagnostic upskilling? Is it knowing when to adjust? Like in terms of the practical application of what you're doing, is there a lot for chiropractors to learn? If I see myself as a kind of hand-only, spine-only sort of chiropractor, and I don't want to head down and the therapy type sort of pathway there too, what sort of upskilling do chiropractors need?
So I'll give you the best answer because there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
But the best answer is honestly doing a preseason test for these athletes.
Yep.
So that is like the gold I would tell you in this conversation is have something to compare them to. And what we call this is a health selfie. So getting a preseason image before anybody starts playing American football, baseball, lacrosse, Aussie rules, football, rugby. The truth is 6 out of the top 10 NCAA sports with concussions are female athletes, basketball, volleyball. So it's not just put a helmet on and run into each other's sports. It's prevalent in a lot of other sports. And the idea would be get some kind of a baseline test before they even start playing. And then when there's a trauma or an event, we can compare them to themselves and check the performance based on who they used to be. And so quite simply, that would mean that we have the ability to check people pre-season, post-event, and make an analysis. Usually you're working with an athletic trainer, you're having a conversation with a medical doctor. But again, if you know some of this stuff, you can kind of like the airplane story, work within your space and not step out of bounds. And it works in every culture, in every country, because there's definitely this need for some kind of an understanding of what's going on prior to the injury, or we're kind of back into the abyss. There's just so much we don't know about the brain that it gets really confusing. And that's kind of what ties into the marketing. So what we've been doing is killing it with 10-minute talks, just going to sports teams, athletic clubs, depending on the age, and just inviting them to come in and do a preseason test. And then if there's an event, we have their information on file, we can compare it to themselves. So my best answer to your question is, number one, have a baseline on the athlete. And then there's not a lot of upscaling. If we're just working post-trauma, that's about 1% of the patients that I see. 99% are interested in prevention and wellness and high-level performance. And so you just get to be a wellness-based chiropractor. I mean, 99% of who I see, we're just adjusting on what we call Tune-Up Tuesday. We're just adjusting them through the season. No symptoms, no pain. That other 1%, you kind of need some pieces of the puzzle
Yeah.
beforehand. And then for sure, there's some things that you would do as far as trying to get a full recovery. Again, just to give some content for your listeners, low caloric meals when they're recovering from a brain trauma is important. Limited screen time is super important. You know, using lenses that block computer light and LED light and stuff like that before bed. So just real quick and easy things that they can apply if they know someone right now. But 99% of it, there's not a lot of upscaling. It's just about getting in front of people before there's an event and teaching them what we do.
What sort of tests make a part of that kind of, health selfie? What are a couple of things that you look at for a baseline?
So there's some different technologies that are out there that will give you some kind of a quantifiable score. You can do some functional medicine scores with it. I would tell you the one test to not do, and this is a personal preference, is the impact test. The impact test is a computerized test that then tells us if someone can run on the field athletically. The two don't go hand in hand. So we're going to type things on a keyboard and answer questions, and that tells us if we can go play a collision or a contact sport. It doesn't work that way. So there's some different technologies that are coming out as far as, depending on where people practice in the world, certain things are certified and uncertified. But the truth is you got to have a baseline test. Usually if they do any kind of testing as a sports club or team, they will tell you there's an impact test. And what I'll do is I'll give you an article that was written by athletic trainers in Athletic Trainer Journal. If you want to share it with your listeners, there's about a 40% incorrect reads on these impact tests. So the inter-examiner reliability is horrible.
Yes.
And also the false reads and the false positives. So I'll provide that for you and you can share it, because that's usually the number one obstacle we come up against is, we're doing this test. But there's no functional movement. There's no wall testing. There's no agility testing, which inevitably becomes a part of it as well.
So if you were doing a bunch of, what are typically known as cerebellar type tests, from Romberg's to Fukuda's to, that sort of stuff, looking at posture, range of motion, these all part of what you would have as a pre-season selfie, that sort of thing as a baseline, or they need to be much fancier?
Yeah. So let's just jump into like Fukuda's real easy. Have them lock their elbows, eyes closed, they're standing in place, and they're supposed to march in place.
Yeah.
And after a certain period of time, they stop, they open their eyes. The gist of it is you should be in the same spot that you started. When I'm looking at someone that either has upper cervical subluxations or has a concussion, you can't really tell the difference from that one test, but something's going on. They're all over the room. And so what becomes important from a patient communication and maybe from a marketing standpoint is I always have a parent with me, because again, a lot of times I'm checking 15, 16-year-old athletes. We do have pro athletes, but majority of my practice is families. So not the pro athletes, that's the exception to the rule. We have some, but it's kids in high school, kids in middle school that want to play active sports, probably like every community. And I would just have their parent with them. So as they close their eyes and they march in place, when they think they're in the same spot, and really they've rotated 180 degrees and they've walked halfway across the room, they're convinced they're in the same spot. When they open their eyes, I always want the parent there to see their reaction.
Yeah.
And this is certainly a patient communication strategy, call it a marketing strategy, because the look on the kid's face, and we've recorded these with their permission, and we've had kids go, "Holy shit, what the mother, father," except they say other things, and just that reaction from the mom, they're like, "Oh my God, what does that mean?" Well, it means we can help them. That means they have subluxations. Now we need to determine if there was a concussion in the past, but this is what we do. And so I'm really quick to tie it back into, this is a spine problem. This is a communication problem. There's something going on here that we need to take a closer look at. And usually we would have preempted that with a history that says no head trauma, no injuries, no falls. You could still do the Fukuda test and see that clearly there's a disconnect going on. And that's what we do as chiropractors. We reconnect it. So I love that you're a chiropractor asking the questions, because I rarely get to use the technical terms. But something like that is just so easy, right? Less than a minute, you do the test, and if you have a parent in the room and they can see what that reaction is, this child is clearly having that mismatch, right? That reflex within the body that thinks they know where they are in space, they're so distorted. And then from there, it just gets easy because now you've got their attention and the communication can begin.
For kudos as a test, I just think that all chiropractors should be doing. Let's ignore for a moment how clinically relevant it is as an education, as an experience. You know, one of the things we say in marketing: never tell somebody when you can show them. When they get to experience, it's super, super powerful from there as well.
Yeah.
I've heard,
Telling is selling, asking is influencing.
yes,
So if I can ask, how does that make you feel? Or where did you
yes,
think you were in the room? I thought it was at the same spot, and they've gone, 3 meters and turned around, and they were convinced in the same spot. That experience, my work is done. So I
mm,
100% agree. It also is a time-saving procedure in the practice, right?
mm,
If you can have someone experience it, and then you can, pre-frame what's going to come, it makes it so much easier. So we'll do stuff like that too with like shoulder range of motion. If someone's got frozen shoulder and you adjust their upper cervical spine and then it comes back, you have to pre-frame it, allow them to experience it, and then you see the outcome. I mean, it just requires so much less speaking on my behalf. They've experienced it. So you're dead on with that. That's the highest level of learning is the experience.
mm. I've heard some researchers suggesting now that a significant component of some of the symptoms that go along with concussion are probably whiplash related. Is there some truth to that?
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, to give you some good examples, and this is what I would call a bridge. So my communication is really important in taking big concepts and just making them simple. A car crash, a whiplash happens anywhere from 4 to 10 G's of force. Now, when you
Right.
say that, maybe most chiropractors don't know what a G force is, right? That's cool. Your patients and practice members certainly don't know what that is, but they would know someone that was in a car crash, or maybe they've unfortunately had one themselves. So 4 to 10 G's of force is a whiplash, is a traditional car crash. All concussions happen over 90 G's of force.
Wow.
Over 90, exactly. So that's
Yeah.
like a holy smoke. So in other words, if you've had a concussion, you are certainly whiplashed, right? So the
Yes.
biomechanics that go with that, it goes without saying. This is exactly what we need to do. Concussion protocol, in addition to a whiplash protocol, which for chiropractors, we share some of the stats and the data. And if you really know how to classify even a car crash and a whiplash, there's ranges of visits that will range anywhere from 50 to 76 based on how you grade the whiplash for the
Mm,
number of visits to a chiropractor
mm,
that are allowable visits. So it really becomes important to understand the language. Then you can get back into being a principled chiropractor, or maybe you just want to keep it mechanistic. I'm cool either way, but when you
mm.
know what you're talking about, I think you really see that there's a much broader audience for chiropractors to be taken care of than otherwise known, and certainly more than neck and back pain that traditional medicine would have us do.
When I think about certainly watching Aussie rules and lots of the contact sports here, that by the time that the person is hit, there's contact, and so there's a whiplash that happens there, and then their head goes down and hits the ground or hits somebody else, and so there's another bounce back there. That this anytime that there is a sprain strain to the upper cervical spine, those symptoms of headaches and nausea, balance issues, eye issues, vestibular issues, there too, right the way through to leaky gut. All that stuff makes sense with just subluxation of the upper cervical spine as well. And I remember seeing, in fact, I interviewed the guy years ago. You might know it is the dude who does the pre and post functional MRIs with the upper cervical stuff. Have you
So
seen?
Scott Rosa, maybe
Yes,
is who you're talking about.
exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So he's
Stunning.
one of the guys that helps me teach the concussion protocol because,
Yes.
and he was on 30 for 30, the
Yes.
ESPN series with Jim
Yeah.
McMahon.
Mm,
So yeah, I mean, part of the faculty I teach some of these protocols with because he's just genius. He's
yeah.
absolutely brilliant. And even your mention of lateral impact. Look, if I'm taking care of someone who's been rear-ended, I'll do flexion and extension cervical x-rays.
Mm,
But also, if someone has that side impact, and it could be head to surface, which is how most of the female
mm,
concussions occur. It's playing basketball and somebody takes out their legs and they whack their head on the hard court, or it's that
yes.
side impact. But if somebody has a side impact for a car crash or a sports injury, then you can actually take lateral cervical flexion, and that also will indicate what you need to be doing as far as adjustments for the
Yes.
uncinate. So that's another, I mean, just nugget for your listeners. Like, hey, yes, you could take flexion extension if it's a rear end or a head-on collision, but If it's side impact, consider taking those lateral flexions, and that'll show you what's going on with the uncinate as far as the adjustment to correct it, and they'll get results beyond what anybody else is getting in the healthcare field, just based on the chiropractic adjustment.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I often used to take flexion extensions, but never lateral flexion, but that makes perfect sense there as well. The sporting groups, have they been open to wanting to hear from you from the 10-minute talks? Is that a difficult door to open?
No, I mean, it's so easy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And now that we're doing this interview post-pandemic, I want to encourage everybody to get out there and do more talks,
Yeah.
do some lectures. I mean, I'll do 60-minute lectures whenever I can with a traditional PowerPoint and go through it. But my advice to those on this call would be keep your talking time to 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes at the most, but you shouldn't ever speak for the full 60 or 75 minutes. It's just too long. So if you're given an hour, speak for 30, maybe 40 at the most, and then just move on from there. We've been doing 10-minute talks because sometimes at the sport clubs, I'm a part of a meeting, but they're not going to host a meeting just for me. So I can have 10 minutes and then the president's going to talk and the coach is going to talk, and then they're doing fundraisers for travel or whatever the thing is. But in a short 10 minutes, they're really receptive to this idea of, hey, I've got to get a baseline. And if I have a baseline and there's a head impact, we need to then recheck the patient compared to themselves. And even medically, they will tell you that's the best thing to do. But we don't have time to do that. We don't do pre and post MRIs. Well, there's simple technologies, and there's a variety of them you can put right on your phone that you can check pre-season, and then you can do it post-season. But we always do the testing in our practice, just for the seriousness of it, for the accuracy of it. And then, if there's a head trauma or an impact or a tackle or something goes on, you can recheck them. And certainly they're open to doing this because it's just this big, vast void of nobody really knows what to do. Even the medical definitions, last time I looked at this, the American Medical Association had 16 different classes of return to play, severity of the injury, how they would quantify a concussion. In other words, they can't even agree on it, right? There's 16 different ways to look at this. And, chiropractors are bad as far as agreeing on things. But when it comes to this topic, medical doctors are in the same boat. There's just so much ambiguity. The one way through that is just kind of clearing it up. And then, getting in front of people and just doing a talk on the topic. I make it about getting back to play and just saying, look, you and I were chatting off camera about the sport of lacrosse. It's near and dear to my heart. I played in college. I was an All-American lacrosse player. My kids play it. I coach my high school's team. Like, I just love the sport. And to me, I don't take a paycheck wherever I go. I want to give back to a sport that's given me so much. I love it. So when I do the talks, I tell people, I'm not doing this because I want to keep kids out. I want to get them back on the field as safely and as quickly as possible.
Yes.
And nobody's advocating for that.
Yep.
Nobody's advocating for a return to play. The athletic trainer slogan is when in doubt, keep them out. I know if your kid's on the field, self-esteem goes up. I know if your kid's back on the field, their high school experience is going to go through the roof. There's other intangibles. These emotional components go with it. That's what I want. I want your children playing the games they love because they're meant to play. And after the last couple of years of lockdowns and canceled seasons, let's get them in for every play that they can have. And let's do this in the safest way possible. For your convenience, at the back of the room, my team is here to make appointments, and we'll just go right into a close. For everybody listening, I always use a BJ Palmer quote at the end of my talks. I just say procrastination is the thief of health. If you're curious, if you want more information, if you want to do it, just schedule in the back of the room. And I know in places like Australia, there's rules around, how you set those appointments. I just always say, for your convenience. For your convenience, my team is here. Let's just do it. We're here. Let's do it right now. Let's go. And the truth is, the people that come in really thank you for being there, for being of service. And I'll tell you what, it's a great way to grow your practice for new patients.
When those kiddos or athletes are coming in for their initial checkups, for the baseline as well, is that an opportunity where you're trying to, for lack of a better term, convert a patient at that stage? Or really it is just about, the getting the baseline health, and then if something happens, what is the goal from that visit outside of the baseline?
It's a great question. And the truth is, I didn't know for a long time. So you know what I did? I just asked them, what's your goal in being here?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that easy. What's your goal in being here? And sometimes they, what do you mean? I said, well, did you have a past sports injury you want me to check out? Were you just curious? Because no matter what talk I give, I think everybody on this call should always ask this question to a new patient
Mm,
following a talk. You should always ask this. What did you hear me say that brought you in here today?
yeah, got it.
What did you hear me say that brought you in? I heard you can fix frozen shoulder. I said that? Oh, geez, I don't know. It's like, I heard you take care of sports injuries. Cool. Do you have one? And you know the answer. Yeah, they
Mm,
do, right?
yeah,
I just like the baseline test and that you're here. Okay, cool. That's probably what we're going to do. So we can certainly investigate it, but I just lead off with, hey, what'd you hear me say? What made you give up some time on your very busy schedule, because we're all busy, to choose to be here today? Well, I heard you say, and then whatever they fill in, that's probably going to be carried over to your reported findings.
yes.
And it's just that simple. So one of my lead off questions is exactly that. From a talk, what did you hear me say? And then that's where we pick it up.
Beautiful. So there's going to be some people in that situation that will get the baseline test. And there are going to be some that say, look, yes, I'd like the baseline test, but I've also had some ongoing issues with this. Would you like me to check that while you're here? Absolutely. And then that opens up those other doors.
That's right. We just had a new patient come in after 7 years. And she said, I did the baseline test with you guys 7 years ago. You weren't pushy. All I wanted was a test. But now I have real injuries. And I knew where to go because you guys were just honest. You kept it on file. We got a couple follow-up messages from your office just welcoming and saying, hey, if you need something, we're here, which I would recommend to anybody. But we just kind of played it hands off. And
Yeah.
then after 7 years, she came and she said, whatever you recommend, I'm going to do it because I already know it's the truth.
Yeah.
And I just was kind of like, okay, what's your name? It was, I mean, we hadn't even
Yes.
really started. It was just like, and so I think that authenticity really bears well for long-term practice, which, we're not here to talk about shortcuts. It's how to build trust in the community.
Well, isn't that the truth? The longer you can go before there's an ask, the more successful that you will be. I know this podcast ends up bringing a lot of coaching clients to me. There's never an ask. It's a gift. It's Gary Vaynerchuk's old kind of, jab, jab, jab first there too. If we just be generous, I say it all the time there too, but if you just help enough other people get what they want, you'll get everything that you want
That's right.
there as well.
Yeah.
Brad, if peeps want to find out a little bit more about the teaching that you do with concussion, and this is just, dude, I just love you're such a multi-passionate person. Like, I've heard you. I love, every time they're like, "What's Brad up to now?"
Oh,
And
buddy.
you go so beautifully deep on things too. So, there's real substance behind everything that you share. If our listeners want to find out a little bit more about the wonderful things that you teach, where's the best spot for them to go?
I mean, we've been putting a lot of stuff out on Instagram. It's Dr. Glow DC on Instagram. So we put some videos out even recently I've got a 12-minute video with the LA Lakers player. We talk about the Atlas adjustment. We talk about his tattoos, and we talk about his philosophies on life. So we put that out. We've got the Stanley Cup winner just saying, hey, I wish more parents took their children to a chiropractor and squirt and peewee hockey, as opposed to waiting till they got to the NHL, because a lot of times they don't get to the NHL if they don't have a chiropractor. It's like, can you say that on camera? So at Dr. Glow DC on Instagram, and our website is levelupmentoring.rocks.
Yeah, I'll make sure I have all of those links there too. So,
Cool.
Dude, let me finish with another BJ quote, and that is, I love you because you love the things that I love there too. So thanks for all the amazing stuff that you do. I'm such a cheerleader for all that you can do.
You really are, man. It's super fun. And
Yeah.
you've got a son that plays lacrosse, and we were just chatting. He's got international fame because I mentioned to an Australian professional lacrosse player, hey, my buddy Angus' son Ed, oh, little lefty attackman, he's on the national team. So make no mistake, you're as humble as they make him as well. And your son's doing some phenomenal stuff on the lacrosse field, and he's a gentleman off the field. So kudos to your parenting. He's got a great reputation internationally, and I know you'd be too humble to talk about Ed, but he's killing it in lacrosse, and that just means you spent hours practicing games and tournaments and giving of yourself. So we do share a lot in common, my man.
Yeah. Look, there's a lot I love about Ed, but mostly he's a wonderful human being. And on top of that, he's a great little lacrosse player, but he's an extraordinary, and I'm excited. He's just about finished his first year of chiropractic, and
That's awesome.
is as excited as he was about his lacrosse. His passion for chiropractic has surpassed that, which is just blows my mind too. So
that's awesome. And we give our kids options, right? You can either be a chiropractor or marry a chiropractor, but you have choices, right? And,
one of those
see
two.
all the above. You could be one and marry one. Like it's all good, but you've got some options here. So yeah, I parent the same way, just so you know.
Yeah, love it, dude. Man, thank you so much for taking the time today as well. And I look forward to when the opportunity comes that we're able to break bread in person again too. Have a brilliant day, mate.
Brother. Sounds good. Take care.
If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.